listening before, you may have heard my prior presentations on the principles of spiritualism. And this is number 3 in that series. The other 2 were on June 14th and June 28th, and they're available. If you didn't pick them up, they're available on Celebrate Life's YouTube channel, where you can pick up those other ones. It's been fun doing this. It's a series, and I've really enjoyed it. Today, we're going to talk about the continuous existence of the human soul. And when I'm present with all of you at the church, I just sit down and start talking. But when I'm online like this, I like to read it from a thing, so I will be reading it. And I apologize for not just giving it extemporaneously. But I want to be rather correct in what I'm saying. So the continuous existence of the human soul is the 4th principle of the National Association of Spiritualist Churches. It's also the 4th principle of the Spiritualist National Union, and it's the 3rd principle of the International Federation of Spiritualists. And I always like to compare all of these so that we get a picture of what international spiritualism is about, and not just what we within our own little group think it's about. Because we are part of a huge international organization of spiritualists throughout the entire world. And the truth is that all the religions of the world believe in that our souls are eternal. If they didn't, they wouldn't have a religion. If you don't have a God to satisfy somewhere, how can you have a religion? That's how most religions work. They have to have eternal life, or they wouldn't have anything to sell. Yet that's where their agreement ends. It stops right there. And that should show you that they don't agree, that everything else that they're talking about when they talk about the afterlife is mostly speculation. They've got all kinds of things. And one I really like is, and that should tell you that no religion has a lock on truth. In spiritualism, we struggle to define this, and I want to share the definitions that we have. In the Spiritualist National Union, they define that as, we recognize the continuous existence of the human soul. Now, we just read our principles a little earlier here in the NSAC, and we say, we affirm that the existence and personal identity of the individual will continue after the change called death. And in the International Federation, they say, we recognize the survival of physical death by the individual spirit. Now, each of those are different statements. But the SNU goes a little further. They say, in another section, spirit is part of the creative force, and thus it is indestructible. Energy cannot be destroyed. It can only change its form. And after death, the physical body is left behind, whilst the soul continues to exist in a different dimension that we call the spirit world. In science, we call it dark energy. And the individual personality continues unchanged by the event we call death. Now, other churches, and of course, have created elaborate afterlife scenarios with heaven, hell, purgatory, and even limbo. Now, that was a place where the Catholic Church believed unbaptized babies were supposedly dumped for eternity. They didn't hear about Jesus, so they went to this place called limbo and just stayed there until Pope Benedict XIV decided after 800 years in April 2007 that the church no longer believed in limbo. He didn't say the Catholic Church was wrong before. He just said we no longer believe in that. But again, that only shows how speculative all the church's beliefs about eternity actually are. And they come and go, and they can be changed. So just what is the truth about the continuous existence of the human soul? And finding the answer is where I personally turn to science rather than belief. And here it is good to remember that we're talking about the science, philosophy, and religion of spiritualism. And that in that phrase, our science comes first and religion comes last. And the following definition was adopted by the National Spiritualist Association back when they didn't have of churches on the end there. It was called the National Spiritualist Association in 1914. And they said it this way: spiritualism is a science because it investigates, analyzes, and classifies facts and manifestations demonstrated from the spirit side of life. Now, as a former board member of the International Association for Near-Death Studies and a test medium at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, I've looked very deeply into all of this. And here's what I know from the science of the near-death experience. 1, there will be an afterlife review. This is where you look at all the prior situations in your life in which you could have done differently, and you'll see it from both sides. And this review occurs in many near-death experiences and has been documented over and over. People who have never heard of the near-death experience and accidentally have one then come back and tell us about their life review. So it's not a preconceived notion, but it's an actual event that would be taking place for all of us. Number 2, you make the judgment. Science has also shown us that we are not judged by a higher power during this life review. The Christian churches, both Catholic and Protestant, through their speculations, have defined this life review as the last judgment. And they make the mistake of believing that a supreme Godhead will be judging each of us, similar to the Supreme Court trial, okay? Yet from the scientific study of the near-death experience, it has become overtly evident that each of us does the judging ourselves. This has been verified through mediumship. This scientific finding that you make your own judgment agrees with what Helen Greaves, a medium, received from Francis Banks on the other side. And if you're unfamiliar with Helen Greaves and Francis Banks, then do read Helen Greaves' 1967 book, Testimony of Light. And by the way, Helen Greaves is not my Helen that I talk about, for some of you who might think so. We also have learned much from the scientific study of mediumship. We have learned at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, we've learned that it is not the medium's imagination. Mediums get their information from outside themselves. This has been verified repeatedly at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. I personally participated in a replication study of this work. And what happens is they isolate the medium in a Faraday cage so that no radio or electromotive forces can reach the medium whatsoever. So they're not getting it from somebody's cell phone somewhere else. And then they measure our brain waves to discover that we're using gamma waves in our brain. We're not using alpha, delta, and like that. We're using gamma. That is perceptions, audible, visual, feelings. We're using our perceptive abilities to pick up this stuff. And that's how we get the information that we get. We've proved this scientifically. And as an aside, when I was in the Faraday cage, as they closed the door, Helen, my Helen, not Helen Greaves, laughed and said, "Alan, they're closing me in here with you." And I responded to Helen, "Well, they're just doing that for the skeptical scientists so they can, block the electromotive forces." And Helen said, "Yeah, but Alan, it's a cabinet," which mediums traditionally used to concentrate their energy back in the 1880s. Everybody had a cabinet, and they took our cabinets away so they could see what the medium was doing. And I answered, "Well, don't worry, they're watching us on closed circuit TV. So to make sure you aren't handing me a written note." And we both laughed. Now, this is Helen talking to me from the other side. But what else has science learned about mediums? Number 2, sometimes mediums are also extremely accurate. While mediums vary in their accuracy under strict protocols of laboratory test conditions, they're normally in the laboratory at least 54 to 62% accurate. Okay, they don't get up to 85%. In laboratory, it's a very nervous condition for a medium. Your head's wired, you're in a Faraday cage. Everything's not at all like you would normally do as a medium. So as parapsychology pushes back the boundaries of dark energy and lifts the veil on consciousness, mediums are no longer thought of as witches or thought to be fringe science, but are becoming treasured assets in the cutting edge technology. But back to our subject, the continued existence of the human soul. Each of us will continue forever through eternity. This current physical life is just the current chapter in a long narrative book which does not end at physical death. How exactly all that happens remains to be seen. But we do know unequivocally from our best science that life does continue after death. Most of the scientists on the cutting edge in the world today realize consciousness survival is a fact. It's only the old people trying to hold on to materialism, Newtonian materialist science, who don't understand quantum electrodynamics, don't understand non-locality, who sit there and say, oh, that can't be true. Scientists, real scientists on the cutting edge of quantum electrodynamics and non-locality realize absolutely that consciousness survives. Life continues after death. And now I'll close with a quote from a spiritualist, but not from a spiritualist, but from a world-famous medical scientist and my personal friend, Dr. Pen van Lommel, MD, with whom I've shared the stage on several scientific conventions. Dr. van Lommel is a Dutch cardiac surgeon who has visited Gail and I here in San Francisco, and whom I and Gail have visited with his wife in Amsterdam. Here's the quote. Ultimately, we cannot avoid the conclusion that endless consciousness has always been and always will be, independent of the body. There is no beginning, and there will never be an end to our consciousness. For this reason, we ought to seriously consider the possibility that death, like birth, may be a mere passing from one state of consciousness into another, and that during life, the body functions as an interface or place of resonance. Now, that's from his 2010 book, The Science of the Near-Death Experience. Consciousness Beyond Life, The Science of the Near-Death Experience, which Pim wrote back in 2010. But we say the same thing as spiritualists. We say, there is no death. There are no dead. Thank you.